Hello, I'm Ronnie Eldridge. Welcome to Eldridge and Company. The person who's taught me everything I know about today's world of finance is Leopold. He's the author of 2 books that demystify the workings of Wall Street. First, in The Looting of America, he explained what happened to our economy and why it crashed in 2008. And then last year, he turned to hedge funds, what they are and how they operate, and how to make $1 million an hour. He's my guest today. So hello.
Hello.
So what are we talking about now? What's happened since this last book?
Well, it dawned on me that we no longer live under capitalism, that we actually live under something called financialism. And I'm on this crusade to get us to face up to it because I think it's extremely important that we understand where we are now.
And what is it?
Well, it's a system by which large financial institutions dominate the rest of us and literally put all of us into debt and siphon money away from the public sector and actually from the private sector into their coffers. And it creates an enormous puzzle for us, which is we are the richest country in the history of the world, yet we feel poor. We're always told about how we can't afford this, that, and the other. We can't afford free higher education. We can't afford health care. We can't afford, pre-K. We can't afford anything. Our infrastructure is collapsing. How can that be? That's the puzzle I'm working on.
And it's a natural thing from the $1 million with the, the hedge fund operators.
Yeah.
Is it?
It is. It's funny, though. It took me a while to actually, I've been working on pieces of this, but when I finally stepped back, I realized the 2008 crash was really the watershed. We've been financializing for a long time, but what happened in 2008 was so remarkable that I realized we have to be someplace new. For example, the norm in capitalism, right, the key thing is profit and loss, right? You're supposed to make profits and survive, and if you take terrible losses, you're toast. Not under financialism. If you're a large financial institution, the larger you are, the less likely it is that you will ever have to get wiped out. So we bailed them out. And not only did we bail them out, we didn't replace the managers, we didn't claw back any of the basically illicit money that they'd made over the previous 10 years during the housing bubble and all the fraud that's coming out.
Did this all go back? I've never understood this. Commercial banks and investment banks?
That was part of it. It all goes back. And
What is that?
Well,
explain it to me.
Okay, there are 2 kinds of banks, but now there are actually many other kinds of financial institutions as well. But there's a bank where you put your money in, and that's called the commercial bank. And there's theoretically, like in the textbooks, they're supposed to take that money and loan it out to businesses, and you get, you get a little bit of interest or maybe no interest. You get access to your money when you need it, and it's federally insured for the most part, and it's safe and sound, and it's like a Dick and Jane book. Everything's cool. Then there are investment banks, and these are the banks that gamble more. But really what they're supposed to be about is they're helping corporations float new stocks. They arrange mergers and acquisitions, and they're riskier. So the idea in the 1930s was to keep everyone realized in the 1930s that high finance was responsible for the crash. So they basically tried to crush high finance, did a great job controlling them. So they separated the 2. They said, look, you can't have commercial and investment banks together because then they'll be gambling with insured money, right? They'll be taking your federally insured deposits. So we're willing to insure deposits. That's what they did in the 1930s. So there won't be any bank runs anymore, but we're going to split them off. So yes, bringing them back together was a very important step. But basically around 1980, the ideology of neoliberalism, deregulation of everything, became the vogue, both with Thatcher and with Reagan, and even a little bit with Carter before that. And the idea was if we could unleash the private sector, it would create an enormous boom, and all boats would rise. And Milton Friedman was leading it ideologically. Chicago School. Greenspan was definitely into it. But the notion was this was supposed to unleash the private sector. What it really did was unleash the financial sector. And the first thing it did, and this is the sort of not so secret history, but we've forgotten about it because it's still going on. The leveraged buyout movement that began there, which previously would have been considered a criminal enterprise, and then turned out with Milliken it was considered again a criminal enterprise. The idea was you buy up a company with borrowed money, in those days junk bonds, but now it's still happening, and then you take that, you extract a huge amount of fees for doing that, and special dividends like Bain Capital and Romney were doing. Then you take all that money you borrowed and you place it on the corporation, and their job is to pay it back. How do they pay it back? They downsize, they shift jobs overseas, they speed up the workforce, they stretch it out, they raid the pension fund, they destroy the union, cut down on wages and benefits, all in the name of paying back the investors and the CEOs who now have stock options that rise with the value of stocks. Oh, and by the way, any extra money you have, you buy back your own shares. The more money you earn, the more you buy back your own shares because it drives up the price of the shares, and that's the stock options of the CEOs. So this ripoff happened tens of thousands of times in the real economy. So the average wage of workers, which were rising with productivity till 1980 or so, went flat and then even a little down. Meanwhile, productivity kept rising. The gap between those two lines all went to the financial sector.
Explain something, because I don't understand the stock market at all. When they bought the company, and then they put the debt on the company, and then the company started downsizing and doing whatever it does, why did the stock go up?
The stock goes up for a couple of reasons. One is it's starting to extract more money from its workforce, right? It's becoming lean and mean.
Yeah.
The second reason is that any surpluses they had that wasn't going directly to the banks, they bought their own stock back. So they're driving up the price by buying up their own stock. So this goes on tens of thousands of times. Now, the implications of this for the rest of us are enormous because, first of all, let's just look at why we don't have money in the public sector. The interest payments on the debt is deductible. So the company's no longer paying the same amount of corporate taxes. They're paying because they're sheltered. It's basically sheltered by paying back all this debt. So what used to go to the federal, state government in terms of corporate taxes now is going as interest payments. So you see corporate taxes as a percent of all taxes go down, individual taxes go up. So, okay, you say that's not so bad. The rich people pay their taxes. They don't pay their taxes. Wall Street arranges for them these offshore. They take a lot of their money, they move it offshore, dividends and are not taxed at the same rate as ordinary income. And you have literally tens of trillions of dollars sitting offshore, both corporate and individual. Estimate $150 billion lost per year in tax revenues just from that maneuver. By the way, that's enough to have every kid in the country go to a public college or university 2 or 4 year free, no tuition, no student loan. Okay, so the other side of this coin is, so the pressure on tax revenues, because now you have a declining income for average working people. The rich aren't paying, the corporations aren't paying, so the tax base is shrinking relative to its needs. On top of that all, you now have the goal of financialism is to load everybody up with debt, not just corporations. So starting in 1980, you see credit card debt take off, go up like this. Student loan debt. Nobody even heard of student loan debt until before. All of a sudden, because the public sector can't support higher education, it used to be virtually free in the United States. You know, systems like California and New York, you paid almost nothing to go. All of a sudden, students are paying more and more and more. Student loan debt rises. It's now larger than credit card debt, mortgage debt. Everything starts rising. And the other thing that happens is in the middle of all this, you have a crowding out from another source, which is prisons. Our prison population also was flat for like 100 years. And then starting in 1980, et cetera, as this downsizing takes off. And people say, oh, it was the war on drugs. It's deeper than that. It shoots up. We have the most prisoners in the entire world. How can that be? It's because they are in the underground economy. There aren't jobs. These hollowed out workplaces all over the country can't hire people anymore. People turn can't hire as many people. They turn towards the underground economy, and then we take the surplus population, we put them in prisons. That costs a lot of money. All of a sudden, there are no funds.
It's so, I mean, it's so interesting because it's common sense, actually, but we don't really put it that way. You know, I mean, we're the 1%, the 99%. So why is the 1% so rich? And now you're explaining.
Well, they're
right.
sitting on top of this
Of
system
all this
called
money.
financialism. So the top CEOs and the whole financial sector are literally draining the public sector and the private sector of resources. And
They do pay the taxes, though, on their 25 million salaries, right? They pay income tax on that.
they don't get their salaries like that.
They get it with stock and stuff.
Capital
that
gains
becomes
is taxed
capital gains.
at 20%, and and also hedge fund income is sheltered through a thing called carried interest. So even if it is like the real income you're describing for work done, et cetera, they get it taxed as capital gains through a thing called carried interest, which both the Democrats and the Republicans have failed to get rid of, even though it comes up all the time. It's the most egregious, outrageous tax break, one of many. And it just continues to sail right through because that's what financialists want. Financialists also want gridlock, right? They're supporting both parties. The best thing in the world for them is no regulation. And Dodd-Frank, by the way, Dodd and Frank were two of the biggest cheerleaders ever for Wall Street. And it's ironic that their name is attached to this bill. Weak. And show me one banker, one financial person that's had to give back any money personally from the money that was basically stolen from us during the rip-off of the housing bubble. Not a penny. And they're all still there. Hardly any of them have been replaced.
And when did this all start?
It starts in right around 1980. That's when finance gets deregulated. That's when we forgot all the lessons of the New Deal and let them loose. And it's been a disaster. It's going to take a generation and virtually a revolution to get the country back.
So now, can we equate the Republican desire to get rid of the inheritance tax to this? Because the kids are growing up. What are they going to do with their money?
Look, we know there's nothing new about the fact that Republicans are basically the party of the rich. This is not new. What's new is so are the Democrats. That's what's new, and that moves the whole conversation to the right. So the Republicans can become even more outrageous, and the Democrats can seem somewhat moderate by saying, "Oh, that's not such a good idea. We shouldn't cut Social Security so much." I mean, look, I like Obama. I respect him, but he actually was willing to cut Social Security. Why? There's nothing wrong with Social Security. What's wrong is we're allowing all this money to be taken from the public sector and moved into the financial sector, and the same thing, from what we call the real economy. And then it creates this other unbelievable dynamic. There's a report coming out. By the time this is aired, it'll be out. A bunch of groups did a report on Los Angeles, and they found out that the city of Los Angeles pays $204 million to Wall Street in fees, in addition to the principal and interest they pay on financial, municipal bonds and whatnot. That's more than that's $51 million more than they pay to repair and take care of all their streets. And they've been cutting those budgets like crazy, but they pay Wall Street $204 million. Why is that? Because we don't have public financing in this country, except in North Dakota. North Dakota has a public bank. In North Dakota, it's illegal, not illegal, it doesn't happen. State and local government is not ripped off by high finance. They don't come in there with these high fee, fancy loans that blow up in your face. That doesn't happen in North Dakota. It happens everywhere else. Los Angeles should have its own public bank. Oh, by the way, we should all have public banks. And the answer to Wall Street is we have to basically eliminate most of it. I've been far, far too moderate in these other books. The problem is way worse than we think it is, way worse. And unless we make the kinds of demands that were made back in the 1870s in the populist movement, unless we make demands on a radical restructuring of Wall Street, we have no chance. But we do have a chance to attract the American people, because who's defending Wall Street? Who in their right mind is going to, except for Chuck Schumer, is going to defend defend Wall Street, people making, you know, $1 million an hour, while you know, you're having trouble trying to get your kid into a school, or you've got 40 people in a class in a public school, or college means you have
So
to
they're
vote to
really,
Hawk.
but they, and then they're in the process of ensuring this by the money they're putting into campaigns, unlimited.
Yeah, that's why you
We
need
have-
an insurgent movement that can shake this up. It's not going to happen, you know, yes, Elizabeth Warren and a few other senators and congressmen could be a part of this because they're willing to speak, you know, speak up. But the idea that students have to take up massive loans, even at lower interest rates, to go to college is outrageous. And, you know, underneath all this, we have all been drinking the Kool-Aid about this idea of finance, that somehow making money from money is like okay, and that
Well, I
that
don't
life
think
should be,
most people don't really understand that, do they?
right. No, I don't think
They
so.
don't
But the
understand.
idea of being in this rat race,
Yeah.
that we've got to work harder and harder and harder to make ends meet in the richest country on earth. The whole idea of that life should be about living a good life, work should be fulfilling and not backbreaking, and that you should earn enough to lead a decent life, and your kids should be able to
That
go to
becomes
school.
a startling agenda.
Yeah, that
doesn't it?
sounds like, you know, communism for me to say that. That was normal. I'm reading books now that show that was normal in the late 50s and 60s to talk like that, to think like that. That's what we aspired towards. Now what are we aspiring towards? Making money for money?
And a pessimism that our children will do worse. I mean, it's just, yeah.
That's the financialism, the downward pressure on the rest of us.
So the Nation has a whole thing today about should Bernie Sanders run for president. Is that enough? Are we ready for that kind of a thing?
Look, I hate to say this, but the Nation in a year will be talking about how we have to vote for Hillary Clinton.
No. All right.
Yes, it'd be nice if Bernie Sanders runs. He has, you know, it'd be great. But we need what we need. This kind of study that took place in Los Angeles. We need that in every city and state across
Who
the country.
financed that?
I think it was a coalition of unions and community groups.
Let's talk about unions. What's happening with them?
Well, there are another set of victims from this financialism. The first, the private sector unions went from being 20% of the workforce down to less than 7%. And once that happens, the next group under attack are public sector workers who are being, you know,
Just
clobbered
decimated,
and
yeah.
decimated. And again, what's happening is, see, we're fighting over the crumbs. We are private sector unions thought and still think that somehow they can negotiate and win in the private sector. They can't. They have to have a two-front war. They have to be going after Wall Street at the same time because there's not enough money left in the private sector, except in some, you know, big industries like Walmart and others. But most of the places are squeezed to the bone by
And they
these
don't
laws.
have unions.
And they don't have unions. And you can't, it's hard to organize new workers, not just because the laws are bad, but if you haven't won any gains for your own union members for a long, long time, how do you attract new members? It's very hard.
Right.
In the public sector, we're fighting over the crumbs. Oh, we got to cut, you know, I don't have a pension as a private sector worker. Why am I paying taxes so that a teacher has a pension? And so, meanwhile, Wall Street's extracting, you know, while we're cutting back on teachers, et cetera, Wall Street's extracting their fees in this never-ending, I estimated yesterday when I was doing some calculations, that's about $50 billion a year coming from state and local government. By the way, if the Fed provided the financing, which they do for the big banks, if they provide it for state and local government, that $50 billion disappears, and all of a sudden we have a huge amount of extra money.
And we don't have 50,000 homeless people.
Which is, it just goes on and on and on. It's like criminal what we are accepting as a society. I think the American people will wake up. I think you saw it a little bit with Occupy Wall Street. The problem was the rest of us weren't ready for that. The labor movement wasn't ready, environmental movement wasn't ready, community movement wasn't ready. We should have been building on that to form a new populist formation. If Bernie Sanders wants to get into that, that's great. But we're all going to have to do a huge amount of work. This is an enormous, enormous problem. You know, I'm trying to sound the alarm.
Do your children understand what you're saying?
Sort of. Yeah, no, my son he's absolutely outraged by the concept of wage theft and homelessness. He cannot bear seeing homeless people. He can't figure out how we can live in Montclair, New Jersey, and there can be homeless people, just a little, just 10 minutes away in Paterson, New Jersey. How can that, or Newark, how can that be? And how is it possible? How is it possible in 2014 for someone to work and then have their wages stolen? Because they're an immigrant, or because, how can that be? How can we allow that to happen? So he's been doing work with worker centers that we're quite
And what
proud
does he
of.
find at college? I mean, are college students feeling this?
There are some, actually.
Yeah.
At first, he didn't think this was the
Yeah.
case, but he's actually in this little seminar where they're trying to develop grassroots projects, and he's investigating wage theft at one of the restaurants in town.
Oh, great.
And other people are trying to get the college to hire unionized labor on their construction projects. So yeah, I think there's some.
I think that there's a hope as the older people, I don't know, but the people on Wall Street are young, so I don't know.
Well, the thing is,
That's just amazing when people can go and spend millions and millions of dollars for apartments and you got people that are homeless. Or that we entertain this debate on food stamps, which is incredible.
we cut food stamps.
I know.
How can we cut food stamps?
You're radicalizing me in 20 minutes. Now, what am I going to do?
Well, I think it starts with we kind of have to jettison frameworks that made sense under the old capitalism but don't make sense now. Without a formation that attacks, constantly, consistently, day in and day out, attacks high finance and Wall Street, there's no chance of success. So I know a lot of, I'm friends, I work in the trade union movement, and people are so focused on, on the workplace and on fighting back in the workplace, and yet that's only half the struggle. And people are so concerned about their work in the public sector and the community sector, and trying to get basically fighting over the scraps, and they need to change their framework to include. By the way, it's not just a sideshow that Wall Street crashed the economy in 2008 and takes all this money. That's not just like oh, by the way, it also does this. Capitalism also does this. This is the driver of capitalism. It's not just a little thing. It's not just like it was in some other era. This is new, and we have to like address it. I think it affects everything. It affects environmentalism. This idea of financial efficiency. These companies that have been hollowed out, they don't have the money for. They're not going to spend money on environmental controls, and the workers in those companies are so insecure that they're reluctant to support environmental change. The money to rebuild the infrastructure isn't there, right? It's in Wall Street. We have to get it back, and I think that's my song.
So this money is all circulating up here?
Look at it this way. We're all over here, either in the public sector or in the private sector. Mm-hmm. Then there's Wall Street, which is relatively tiny, but it's getting, 40% of all corporate profits. Virtually everything is indebted to them. State, local government, consumers, students, homeowners, all indebted to them. So the money is in this little thing. There's this huge amount of money. Sitting on top, this is, Bain Capital put out an incredible report. They estimate that in 10 years, the world economy, which will be about $90 trillion, on top of that will be sitting $900 trillion of debt, of financial assets. I found this other study. You'll love this. It looks at the top 50, it lists the top 50 corporate entities in terms of their power over the 25,000 transnational corporations. 47 of the top 50 are financial companies. Mm. Walmart is one of the non-financial companies, and two oil companies. One pharmaceutical company, one oil company, and Walmart. 47 are financial entities. 24 of them are in the United States. 23 of them are banks or insurance companies. that's what's running the world economy. And we talk about the economy, and this includes some of the people that I really admire, like Robert Reich and Paul Krugman. They talk about it like it's still the kind of old Keynesian model. It's just not that anymore. We have to do something about this financialism, or we're cooked.
Is there anything that has evolved over years that hasn't changed? I mean, capital is, that doesn't need adjustments. It needs an adjustment, more than you're saying it needs more than adjustment.
Well,
what does it get replaced by?
it's a really good question.
And we only have 1 minute.
Okay, I
Yeah,
I
come
think
back.
our attention has to be in replacing as much of Wall Street as possible. We can have public banks. We could set salary caps. Next time they crash, they're going to come begging for help again. We could set salary caps, like saying, okay, you can't make, as long as the average working
Worker
wage,
gets, yeah.
you can't make more than $1 million a year. Nobody on Wall Street can make more than $1 million a year. Well, that would chase a lot of people out of there back into the real economy where we need them. I think, a lot of aspects of free enterprise in the real economy, is a good thing.
It's an interesting story today in the Times that banks are encouraging their workers to take the weekend off, investment banks, I guess, because the young people, they're having a harder time recruiting. Is that true? I think that's how I understood the article.
It's like there was an article about this one guy saying he suffers from wealth addiction. And he's in a group, like Alcoholics Anonymous, to get over it. And I'm thinking, this is a structural problem.
Yeah.
We got a real big problem here.
Well, we have to come back and talk about this some more. Meanwhile, God knows what we should do about this. I have to go home and study this all again. Thanks very much, Les Leopold.
Thank you for having me.
If there are any people you'd like to hear and topics you'd like us to explore, please let me know. You can write to me at CUNY TV, 365 Fifth Avenue, New York, New York, 10016, or you can go to the website at cuny.tv and click on Contact Us. I look forward to hearing from you.